Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Business of Business podcast, Two Daughters and Their Dad. I'm your host, Stacey J. Dempsey, and thankfully, like always, I have the one and only dad and the other daughter. Good morning to the both of you.
Good morning.
Good
And
morning.
good morning or good afternoon to all of our listeners who are tuning in today. Today, we want to talk about, are we headed into a recession? And what exactly does recession mean? Is our business bit recession proof or recession prone? So Dad, can you maybe describe to our listeners what does recession mean?
Yeah, I mean, simply, recession is just a slowing of the economy. And through that slowing of the economy, as business slows down, then you see more impact on jobs, you see more layoffs and more, and so you will see unemployment rise. Um, so that's it in its simplest form. I mean, we've recently been experiencing over, past few years, high inflation. And so what high inflation does that can lead to a recession is because typically high inflation is driven by a hot economy where, there's a lot, people are buying things up, they're spending money. And so prices start to go up because the demand's there. And then as prices go up, you see higher and higher inflation, especially if interest rates are low. When interest rates are low, money is cheaper to get, to borrow. And so you'll see prices go up. And that's what we've been experiencing because, again, for a long time, I mean, if anybody was in the housing market, when, when mortgage rates were 3%, 2.9 for 30-year mortgages, well, that's great, except what was happening out there. You went out there to try and buy a house and you ended up having to, bid it up $40,000 and $50,000 over asking price because the demand was so great. So that pushed prices up. The way the the Federal Reserve addresses that is through raising interest rates. And that's always the tricky part because then they start to raise interest rates in order to slow or, kind of mitigate inflation, but what's the right interest rate to get there? And many times they overdo it. They raise them too high, and then the pendulum swings the other way. Now the economy is slowing, which is what they want, but it slows to the point where businesses are having to then lay people off, and it really hits the job market, even though the prices are better, but revenue's down, business is down, that type of thing, because the money, to buy stuff is not there. So, and then ultimately it's through that slowing of the economy and then the unemployment going up leads to a recession. And, there's definitely been, um, recessions many times, over since we've had a modern economy. You can go all the way back to the Great Depression, and then you can kind of then we've had recessions after that. And then we had what they define as the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, when, the financial markets and everything, kind of really shut down. And so, again, a lot of layoffs, a lot of, tough things in the economy. So, recessions are part of our economy. It's just the way it works, because then when the recession hits, then they start to lower interest rates again to get the economy going. Now they got to juice it back up. So businesses will sell more and, and create more jobs. So it's kind of a cycle. But inflation and recession are two different things, but they are tied together. And high inflation will ultimately lead us to typically the possibility of a recession. And that's where we're at today. I mean, we're recording this, kind of the day after a big sell-off, in the stock market, 2 days of sell-off in the stock market. And the biggest reason they're saying for that is that, they're starting to sense that we are possibly heading to a recession. And they're looking at that globally in other countries and their slowing economies and all the stuff that goes into that. So I think this is a good topic for us to kind of unpack a little bit, because, now's the time as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, to ask the question, and you posed it in your introduction, Stacy, is your business recession proof or is it recession prone? So I think that's
what would be some things that a business owner could do today to start to analyze if their business is recession prone or recession proof?
Well, I think, a simple one is your business considered more of a discretionary business or is it a necessary business? Meaning Jennifer's business, for example. Of course, I say, the hair business is recession proof because I think, everybody's still figuring out a way to get their hair done. But that can be definitely a recession prone because, that's not something that's a necessity, or they might cut back on a service. They might not do all that they would normally do because it's not a necessity. So if they're, if there's been a job loss in the household, if there's the potential of a job loss or being, laid off, those, her business is going to be one that they're going to maybe think twice about or, spread it out longer, those kind of things. So, clothing, especially if you're more in a, kind of that middle, not maybe really high end, but not discount stores, but kind of that middle where, you pay a little bit more for clothing. That can be a business that can get, slowed up because obviously people won't buy, maybe that at that price point. Now, if you get high end, those are going to be wealthier people and that might not impact them so much, but kind of that, that middle, so any type of clothing, any type of, again, massage, body treatment type of stuff can be prone to, the recessions. So I would say anything that would fall into, those categories where on the necessity side, again, people are still going to need to buy food. They're still going to need, the things that, to live every day. And so like in our case, for the most part, we're fairly recession proof because, people still need insurance. They need to have insurance on their home and their cars, so their businesses, now obviously they're trying to look to cut costs maybe and see if they can find a better price point. But again, insurance is fairly recession proof, on that piece. Now maybe for life insurance, those kind of products, people that could be a little bit more discretionary because nobody's really telling them they have to have life insurance, but somebody's telling them they have to have insurance, on their cars, their home, their businesses, and that type of thing. So that can be an example, of a recession proof.
So I love this topic because as a business owner for the last 8 years, I've never been through a recession with my business. But what I can tell you is that in our world, in the beauty industry, we are always kind of talking about how important it is for us to understand what's going on in the world because it does have a direct reflection on our business. And I was sharing with you guys earlier, obviously, I see a lot of people, I talk to a lot of people, and that main topic that's going on behind the chair right now is like, hey, inflation's crazy. Can you believe how expensive groceries are and gas and X, Y, and Z? So it's important for, I think, any small business to understand what is going on. And you said it, Dad. I don't think that people will completely stop getting their hair cut, but they will stretch it out longer. They might only come to the salon 2 times a year. They will definitely pull back. Same thing with massages, any service business. You can stop getting your nails done. I think that's kind of one of those first things that people start to cut back on. So when you are in a business like mine, it is a real concern. And so while we're living in this moment and we're thinking forward thinking, is the real question for me is how can we make it easier for people to do business with us? And, not obviously it costs a lot of money to run your business right now, right? I just had a price increase on my rent. Things are going up. So it's not like I'm going to turn around tomorrow and lower my prices, but maybe we can start to think creatively around making it easier for people to visit the salon more frequently, since we know that they're going to pull back. And so one example of that is we have this blowout membership, right? And it's funny because I love when people are like, "Oh, you guys are so busy for New Year's Eve." People used to come in and get their hair done and makeup done to go out for New Year's Eve. That doesn't exist anymore. We've seen so much change and shift within our industry and when people do business with us. So we want to try and make it easier. So we have these blowout memberships that is very cost effective, and it really just gives people an opportunity to come into the salon more often and not have that such high price point maybe each time. And that gives the stylist an opportunity to make money, obviously, the business to make money, and for us to invite customers inside of our business more. So I think, especially when we're talking about service based, I'm not saying discount, but being creative in what you can offer, maybe that doesn't cost so much in your business. Blowouts, we were not necessarily using products. It's not like a color service or something like that where the salon has to pay for those products to be able to be used. So being creative in that way that we can really give people incentives to come into the business without making major discounts when it comes to service-based industries, I think would be my best piece of advice on this topic.
I completely agree. And I think, as you think about your business now, and again, I mean, there's no guarantee we're going to be heading into a recession in the next year, but there probably will be a point where we're going to have another recession. I mean, they are cyclical, in nature. And of course, Jen, you've never been through a recession, but you've been through COVID.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Well,
So I mean, COVID is like a recession on steroids.
well,
But trying to prepare for that ahead of time. Again, I think you would ask yourself that question, and if the answer is yes, then be thinking about, okay, now what do I need to start thinking about today if that is going to happen? And so part of that could be, hey, business is pretty good now, and so maybe that means being more intentional of trying to be putting money away, putting money off to the side to be able to kind of get through, a down period. So you have some backup. That is certainly, that's always good, even when it's not recession, but, maybe even more so. So that would be something. And then I think another thing is, be thinking about even the area that you're in, and who is your customer base. Is your customer base, is your client base in that kind of demographic that would be prone to a recession? So an example of that might be, if you live in an area where, there's some industries that provide a lot of jobs, but because of that jobs are good when things are good, and jobs aren't good when things are bad. So, so for example, maybe if you lived in an area where there was a lot of emphasis around car manufacturing, and building cars, and, well, in a high recession period, car sales are going to drop off because people aren't going to go out there and buy cars if they don't have a job or if they're fearful that they're going to be losing a job. So understanding, what's my demographic, is the demographic of my area one, that would be prone to have more recession impact. So for example, the area that I live in, I don't, there's a lot of different types of businesses there, but it's also very heavy in the healthcare area, very heavy in the education, higher education, a lot of education type of work over there, working in education. So, obviously from a recession, people are still going to end up going to doctors, are still going to go, unfortunately, into hospitals and those kind of things. So you're typically not going to see a lot of layoffs, in the healthcare industry. People still, kids are still going to go to school. They're still going to go to college. Yeah. So you're not going to see a lot of job displacement from a recession, with teachers and support people in education. And so those are all the things that you would also need to look at. But like I said, if you're, I was on a Zoom call last Friday, and there was the area that a couple of the guys were in was an area where there's a lot of defense manufacturing for for the government, and they were just talking about that you could almost guarantee about every I forget how long they said that you're going to get laid off, because of the ebbs and flows of, that business. And so, so that's just how it worked, so whether it was recession, whether it was just, how that business and industry worked with government contracts. But, those are examples of just understanding, your area demographic.
Yeah, and I would have to assume that, any business owner that maybe has lived through COVID, and you mentioned it, Dad, I'm sure there's a plethora of things that you can kind of go back to say, these are the things that, I had to do out of just maybe some sheer panic or on a moment's notice, had to change some parts of my business. But I would have to assume that, living through COVID, there would be areas to say, all right, if we do go into a recession, maybe there's a portion of my business that is more recession proof than others. So maybe I start focusing more on, building up one portion of my business in anticipation that maybe a recession is going to come. But really just kind of taking that, reflection on what worked really well, what didn't, what did I learn from, and just start preparing as much as possible, which, I feel like no matter how much you prepare, nobody has the crystal ball, but definitely, I feel like too, even just as a business owner, knowing that there was this big drop in the market, that's kind of a clue. I mean, maybe I should know, like, that's, I mean, I know it's not good, but I don't know if I would necessarily be like, or might be on the brink of a recession. But I think even just that piece of information is like, okay, we know we've had inflation. We know things are costing more. We're now the market. There's these things that, okay, and like you said earlier, Dad, it's all a cycle. So it's probably coming at some point. We just don't have the exact date and time. So excellent. Wonderful.
Well, I mean, I think another thing that, it's good for our entrepreneurs to think about too is, when it comes to your customer base, your client base, all right, well, is there a segment of that that's going to get more impacted by a recession than others? And so is there a way to, market into, or to, again, be creative on how to get to that segment of your customer base, that is not going to be overly impacted by a recession, to see if they're, can somehow, offset some of the losses you might have from that group that's going to be more, more impacted, through job losses and those kind of things. And again, each individual business is going to be different. But let's just say, for example, you have, a portion of your business, is older, maybe more a retired age group. Well, again, if they're retired, now inflation might impact them, but the recession is not going to, right? Because they're already, they're getting their retirement money, they're getting their Social Security, so is there a way to, creatively do things that's going to, maybe bring more of that business in the door, expand it, maybe not try to sell that, that same group of people that maybe have been loyal to you more, but could do that too. But how can I expand that group now to something, how can I market, and build my marketing around growing that segment of my business, because, and bringing more of those people into my business, so, just be, and that's what's nice about, kind of what we do, because we have, the different, kind of lanes that we run in terms of different aspects of insurance and investments and those kind of things, so we can kind of shift, into the lane that, is kind of, is still going to be working, even in a recession, so for example, we still got people turning 65 every day, and, even in recessionary times. Well, one of the lanes we run in is health insurance, Medicare supplements. We provide a great service, to clients in that area and bring a lot of value. So, maybe we need to redistribute some of our marketing dollars, to focus more on trying to drive more of those folks, and for, considering us for that type of business. So, that's just, again, another example how you could be thinking about maintaining and even, still doing well, even through a recession.
Absolutely. Well, great information. Definitely, always stuff to think about when it comes to business, but I think that this was really very insightful and, and even just the fact that recession, it's all of this is a cycle, right? Dad, how many recessions have you lived through?
Well, I mean,
1,500,000,000 years
but
later.
I mean, obviously we went through, I was young. I didn't, I was a kid,
Boy.
but, there's been the recession in the 70s, with very high interest rates, and there was, a lot of people, got knocked out of jobs. So that was, a very challenging time. Then you had, a recession in the early 90s. Then we had one in the early 2000s. Then you had the kind of the Great Recession in 2008. So, I mean, I would say, true, 3 or 4 anyway,
Yeah.
and so, but again, it's just it's a business, it's a cycle. It is a cycle.
Yeah.
So it's just something that our entrepreneurs just need to be thinking about. And if they think about it ahead of time, then they're not all of a sudden waking up saying, boy, revenue's down. What's going on?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, we're in a recession. Well, that's what's going on. And we kind of saw it coming 6 months, a year, out, so that's why we definitely want to get this, podcast out to people.
Out to the masses. So here we go. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. We appreciate you, and we will see you guys in our next episode.